Well, welcome to the second video in the series I'm calling Understanding the Guitar. And I hope you've watched the first one. We're gonna start off from where we left off in the first video, which talked all about the octave. So in the last video, we basically talked about being able to play the same note anywhere on the guitar, right? So A, that kind of thing. The next interval that is most important to know and most important to music is called the perfect fifth. And again, the guitar is great for visualizing this and demonstrating this. So if we've got our open root note and our octave on the 12th fret, the perfect fifth is on the 7th fret. So why is the perfect fifth so important? Well, going back to that idea of simple fractions result in strong intervals. Here we're dividing the string into thirds, okay? So we've got a third of a string here and 2/3 of a string over here. So again, that's creating a very basic fundamental interval. And the perfect fifth is another structural interval. And what I mean by that is that the root and the octave and the fifth are kind of the building blocks for things like chord progressions and very, very stripped down chords, which I'll demonstrate in just a second. So if you go and try and solo with just roots, octaves, and fifths, you can hear that it still doesn't have much color or emotion to it. So this is another interval that kind of feels, like I said, like a building block, like one of the biggest beams in a house when you're making the framework of a house. This is another structural, a column that's holding up the house. So let's talk a little bit more about why this is important. I think it's really good to look at it on a string on the guitar because you can actually see how the perfect fifth functions. If we consider this as our home base, this root note, and this as a kind of destination, because when we get to the octave, we're basically back where we started, starting on an E note, ending on an E note, an octave higher. Then this 7th fret, one way to think of it is it's the maximum distance from the root that we can get a dramatic resolution out of. So in other words, going from this 7th fret down to the open string is the maximum distance we can get before we kind of enter the gravitational field of the next E note in this case. So in other words, if you get to, say here, the 9th fret, well, this note kind of wants to either go up to here or go down to here, but it doesn't have the same draw to go down here. So to a certain degree, I think you'll have to take my word for it, but this is considered the most dramatic resolution in music. So we will call this going down a fifth. So from this is a B note, in this case, down to E. Okay, so like I said, if you try and solo with this, it's not really going to be very satisfying because that's not really what we're talking about yet. We will definitely get there, but right now we're still talking about kind of the building blocks, the very fundamental building blocks. But since this is such a dramatic structure, there are plenty of songs that simply use a chord built on the root and then a chord built on the fifth. And you can get a perfectly good song structure out of that. So for instance, the chorus to Yellow Submarine. Okay. I'm not gonna sing the melody because I'll probably get a copyright strike or something, but if you can hear the words to the chorus, that's simply going from the root, a chord, an E major chord to a B major chord. There's a country song called Jambalaya that Hank Williams Sr. used to sing. that entire song is simply, and then it goes up to 5. It stays on the 5. It goes back down to the. So you can see that it's kind of a fundamental structure. We would call that a 1 chord and a 5 chord. Chords built on the root and the fifth, the perfect fifth. While we're on the subject of chords, let's just kind of look at what we can do with the notes we've looked at so far. In the last video, we looked at an octave. Here's an A note and then an octave above that A note. So now if you're looking for fifths across the strings, the first one is if you're starting with a root here, you're going to skip a fret and go to the next string. So it's like this. So we have a very comfortable little shape. Perfect fifth. If you add that to the octave shape we studied in the last video, then you have what a lot of people call a power chord. It's basically a root, an octave, and a fifth reinforcing it. You can just move that around. You can do that up here too, with a root based on the 5th string, octave on the 3rd string, 5th in between them. You can also do one on the 4th, 3rd, and 2nd strings. You don't see this one as much, but it's a good one. So this would be a G, and then skip 2 frets, skip a string, G on the 2nd string, right? And then our root to 5th right there. So that's just a little look at using fifths and octaves and roots in chord shapes. So this next idea is very cool, and it's going to require a little bit of a mental leap. But if we have this note, a root, and we have this note, an octave, and we have this note, a fifth, and we've determined that the strongest chord change is going down a fifth, right? Taking a note and going down to a note 7 frets below it. That's the strongest musical movement we've got. Well, what if we go to this note, this octave of the E in this case, and we go 7 frets below that? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. That gives us a new note. That gives us the note on the 5th fret, which is an A in this case. So if we use the logic that anytime you have a note and you go down 7 frets, you've got a descending perfect fifth, that's a very strong change, right? Well, we can do the same thing here. And this is where intervals start to really help your thinking, because we're kind of operating on this abstract level of, we're thinking of the distance of 7th frets as being something musical. And we're applying it here. And we're finding a new note. Okay? So now we have these notes. Still not really enough material to play an interesting solo, but if you know your blues, you may have noticed that, if you've ever played blues in E, you may have noticed that the roots we've got right here are our 1 chord, our root note, and then we've got our, what's this called? This is the 4. Back to E, up to 5. So what we've arrived at is E, A, and B, and another E. And if you've played much guitar at all in the key of E, that should sound pretty familiar to you. Those are the 3 main chords in the key of E. And the reason why those are the 3 main chords is because they're built on such strong intervals. So this note we arrived at here, this A, is actually called the perfect 4th. One way to think of it is that if you play a major scale, an E major scale on the low E string, do, re, mi, that that's the fourth note of the major scale. Okay? If that helps you to remember that it's called the fourth. So we have the fourth, and we have the fifth. Root, fourth, fifth, octave. And we arrived at our fourth through this kind of cool method of using the notion of a fifth to find the fourth, if that makes any sense. Okay, so why should you care about all this? Well, we now have arrived at the strongest three chords in any key. The root chord, sometimes called the tonic chord, also called the one chord because it's built on the first note of the scale. The four chord, I'm just playing barred major chords here, and the five chord. Let's just stick to the two intervals we talked about, and let's just use these power chords. So I'm going to play root, fifth, octave. Root, fifth, octave. Root, fifth, octave. And then you could go all the way up here. A little hard to play on this guitar. But let's just stick to these three. And you can probably think of about 1 million songs that use those three chords. So I hope that kind of demonstrates how the octave, the root, the fifth are these structural intervals. They are the foundation for pretty much everything. So what you want to do in terms of now adding to your knowledge of the neck is you want to take the octaves that you were practicing in the last video and you want to find where the fifth is in relation to those notes. And the good news is there's some very distinct patterns. So the first pattern to memorize is that if you have a root, then there's going to be a fifth, 2 frets above and one string up. So in other words, root note here on the 5th fret of the 6th string, there's a fifth on the 5th string, 7th fret. It's another one of those real comfortable first finger to third finger stretches, okay? So that's going to apply here. If I go, here's another A, that's a fifth above. And we might as well address this now. We saw it in the last video when we had the octave shapes that went like this, and then you had to go an extra fret. The relationship between the third string and the second string is different from the relationship between all the other strings. So if this is a fifth, on all the string sets, strings 6 to 5, 5 to 4, 4 to 3, when you get to the relationship between strings 3 to 2, you have to go up 1 extra fret. So in other words, this is an A, and I have to go 2 frets. So let me show that to you again. Strings 6 and 5, a fifth is only 1 fret apart. Strings 5 to 4, they're 1 fret apart. Strings 4 to 3, they're a fret apart. But then strings 3 to 2, they are not a fret apart. There's 2 frets in between. It's a space of 2 frets. Then when I go back to finding an A on the second string, once again, skip 1 fret. So that's the very first place to find a fifth above the note you're playing. And if you've ever played any kind of like Chuck Berry rock guitar, that's the shape you're playing. And then you're adding this note. Right? Or if you're playing just really stripped down like punk or something. It's just a root note and a fifth note. Root note and a fifth. That's all it is. So for now, I would just practice that one method for finding a fifth above the root note. Now let's find the fifths below the root note. So in other words, here's a A, and then here's a fifth. Here's an A. Here's an A. How do we find those? The formula for that is if you have a root note on a string, the fifth is going to be the same fret and 1 string down. Now again, this is where you have to do a little mental shift because the relationship between strings 3 and 2 is not the same. So here is a A note on string 2, now I can't go to the same fret. And the rule is that the second string is raised a fret. So you're going to have to go like that. It's the fifth is 1 fret below the root note. Everything else, here's a root note, same fret. Here's a root note, same fret. My advice for now is to get to where you can play a given note, so say an A note, all over the guitar in every octave, and get to where that network is really, really ingrained. And then start seeing if you can find these 2 locations of fifths using those 2 formulas. So if I stick to this section, I've got my 3 A notes, and I want to get to where I can really find those with no problem. And then I know I have a fifth and a fifth. So that gives me a even more fleshed out skeleton. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 notes. So for instance, if I now go to the A minor pentatonic scale, I now have 2 notes that are very strong structural notes that I know I can land on. And to be honest, if you got to that point where you could find the roots and the fifths all over the neck, that is really going to take you a long way towards being able to solo better in something like blues or rock. Because like I just said, you have 2 notes to resolve to. And let's take a blues. If there's the A7 and a D7 and an E7 as the 3 chords in a 12-bar blues in the key of A, well, the root note is going to be where you're going to want to resolve while the tonic chord is going. Right? You're going to want to resolve to an A note. When it goes to the D chord, well, there's an A in a D chord, so you can still resolve to an A, and it's going to work fine. When it goes to the E chord, you can resolve to the fifth. So with those 2 notes to resolve to, you can really define the phrasing of your soloing. In other words, when you want a line to resolve and feel like it's come to rest, you resolve to the root. When you want the line to have some unresolved feeling, when you want it to be unresolved, you resolve to the fifth. Because that wants to come to rest on the root. So that was the root, fifth, root. And even without any chords underneath, you can hear the musical logic to that. And the reasoning behind that is because, like I said, that perfect fifth really wants to resolve to the root note. Again, the strongest change in music. And we're going to keep talking about that because that descending perfect fifth, or here we can go from here, that move is just central to music. Now you might be wondering about, should we start learning the fourths all over the guitar? I wouldn't actually worry about that at the moment. I think it's going to be good enough to learn those fifths. The fourth, we are going to get to in terms of playing it all over the neck. For now, I think it's enough to understand how we derive the fourth and that it's related to being a perfect fifth below the octave here. The guitar is so cool in terms of being able to visualize these things, because look at what we've got. Imagine the guitar stops at the 12th fret. We've got a note down here and then a note here. So we have notes on either end. And then right in the middle, we've got these 2 critical other notes. One thing you could do if you want to kind of stretch out your ear and ingrain some of this is limit yourself to one string and just play root, octave, fourth, and fifth. See what kind of bass lines and ideas you can come up with. If there are songs you know that you know the key of, you could try and find the root, octave, fourth, and fifth. You could also find some E blues jam tracks and try playing just the sixth string, or you could find an A blues jam track and practice on the fifth string, or you could find a D blues track and practice those intervals on the fourth string. All of that is going to get you much more comfortable with the feel of these changes. If you haven't listened to a lot of blues or played a lot of blues, I would recommend it. Obviously, if you just don't care for it, then I guess don't. But having the 12-bar blues kind of in your bones is going to be such a benefit to you, because it's almost like it's like going to the gym or something, because you're just training yourself to hear the changes of a 1, a 4, a 5, a 1. And that 12-bar blues progression is just it's almost like a mythic tale or something, because you start off home bass, right? And then after you said that line of lyric, you say the line of lyric again, but you say it over the 4, so you're a little bit far away from home. And then you come back to where you started. And then you travel a little bit further away from home to the perfect fifth. And a lot of times you travel by steps back down. Progression is as old as the hills, and people still aren't tired of it. A lot of times at the very end of the progression, you go back to that 5 to build up tension before you go back to the beginning again. That's one more thing about this perfect fifth. You know, if you can picture a band going nuts at the end of a song, right, where they're just going, sometimes it's called a trash can ending, where the drummer's going crazy, everybody's going crazy. Well, 99% of the time that's on a fifth, because it's maximum tension. And we're going to go back. What are we going to end on? We're going to bring it home to the 1. All right? I hope that all is helpful, and I hope it makes sense. Next video, we're going to bring in the thirds, and I think that's where things are really going to open up. We're actually going to be able to make some melodic sounding music. But until then, thanks a lot for watching.